I want us to become brothers again like we used to be, and for us to find ourselves and bond with each other. Can we agree to that?
Opinions vary.
Welcome to Three Brothers Filmcast. I'm Aaron Bergstrom, and I'm here with my brothers,
Anders
and Anton.
My last name is the same as my brother's.
And this month we're discussing Emerald Fennell's Wuthering Heights, starring Margot Robbie as Kathy Earnshaw and Jacob Elordi as Heathcliff. We'll also pay tribute to the late actor Robert Duvall. Remember to leave us a 5-star rating and review and share the podcast with your family and friends. We're an independently produced podcast, and every rating and review helps us reach new listeners and grow the show. Thanks for listening, and now on to the show.
And here we go.
Is it possible to be a bad adaptation and a good movie? This is central to any discussion of adaptations of Emily Brontë's Wuthering Heights. This iconic Gothic novel has been adapted several times over the past century, perhaps most notably by William Wyler in a 1939 version starring Laurence Olivier as Heathcliff, which was nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars. In most cases of adaptation, the novel has been altered considerably from page to screen, which is certainly so with Fennell's latest version, which channels the broad strokes of the novel into a romance that seems aimed squarely at lusty teenagers and middle-aged women who like erotic fiction. To her credit, she does add quotation marks around the film's title, as if saying this is only Brontë's Wuthering Heights in the broadest sense. This is Fennell's film through and through. In this new Wuthering Heights, the entire second half of the novel is removed. We get nothing of Kathy and Heathcliff's children, the years after Kathy's death, and the slow decline of everyone in Heathcliff's orbit into poor health and abject depression. We don't get the frame narrative with Lockwood, and we don't get the heavy focus on abuse, both mental and physical, of the novel. By so radically shifting the narrative focus of the novel, Fennell's adaptation tries to reframe the entire film into a star-crossed, doomed romance between Kathy Earnshaw and Heathcliff. It's no longer an interrogation about the destructive power of possessive love and class and racial revenge, with a strong dose of misanthropy, but about the all-consuming erotic link between two damaged people. Trapped in the narrowed framework of most prior adaptations, Fennell's new one is still a bad adaptation of Brontë's work. But is it a good movie?
Okay, Ramblers, let's get rambling.
Anton, I've read your essay, so I know your critical take on Fennell's film. So Anders, you texted that your wife, upon seeing Fennell's film, remarked that she absolutely hated it. Do you share your wife's opinion?
Yeah, this is a bad movie. We can come back to the question of adaptation because it can be interesting and instructive to think about the choices made or not made. And I agree with you that I don't think that, you can make a good movie with even like some of the basic outlines of a story, a novel. It doesn't, I'm not one of those people that says that it's not possible. But like, let's just, even pretending that there was no, novel that I'd read in university and no, cultural tradition about this book and this story, I still think that this is not a good movie. I didn't enjoy it, and we can talk about Emerald Fennell and her provocations and things like that. But I actually think this film is not nearly as provocative as it thinks it is. It's like it's juvenile in a sense, in that it reminds me of this is maybe the girl's version of like the boy who wants to shock everyone, and but they're not nearly as daring or interesting as they think they are. So like, this movie is actually, frankly, and this is the worst thing for all that people talking about it's interesting look and its set design. It's and I like the actors. Some of the cast, not necessarily in this film, but I've liked them in other things. But this movie's actually kind of boring. I kept checking my watch for the last 30 minutes of this, just being like, just get it over with. I know where you're going with this, and I'm like, I don't need this anymore. It was like, yeah.
How do you stretch half a story out to such interminable
length
where there's no tension about whether something will resolve or not?
At least the 1939 version, which I like, but which I think is flawed in terms of an adaptation especially, at least it comes in at a crisp, I think it's
104 minutes.
Yeah,
The magic number for a movie now.
Whereas a movie, like, if you're going to trim so much, I'm not sure why you have to go past 2 hours. But you're right, Anders, that I also found this movie by 3/4 of the way in to be terribly boring and just repetitive. And there was times where it would just do another scene, yet another scene of Heathcliff and Kathy coming back together and saying that they shouldn't be back together. And there was times where it seemed like it was written like they didn't know that there was the prior scene. And so it just became tedious. And the provocations,
Yes, tedious is the right word.
You only get to provoke and shock so many times in a work of art. And in my essay, I talk a bit about the value of provocation and provocative works of art. But here, like, if you just keep bludgeoning the audience with it, they get bored of it. They get disinterested. So I just find that this movie is a failure, even on the terms of what Emerald Fennell is wanting to do. And we can then even get into the fact that I would just disagree with what she seems to be
Yeah,
doing.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, let's stay on the topic, though, of audience, of what this movie is attempting to be, because it's not attempting to be Wuthering Heights as Brontë envisioned it, or even as past adaptations have attempted to translate it to cinema.
Yeah.
It's very much English lit for people who don't read, but people who watch social media clips. Like, it's for book talkers,
book talk,
right?
or they call it? Yeah.
And that also really summarizes, I think, why this movie is so provocative, but only for people who have no sense of culture or art. Because, like, I was in there in the theater, I noticed, small pockets of 19-year-olds around me kind of tittering at, like, oh my goodness, he licks her finger, or oh my goodness, like, that's so naughty, that kind of attitude.
Yeah.
But there's no nudity in this movie. Which
Insane,
is,
but
I'm like, you couldn't even give me Jacob Elordi's ass. Are you kidding me? Like, what is this? Like, what? You're not even playing to your audience, really. But it's because Gen Z's scared of sex, actually, on screen.
Yeah.
They like the idea of it, but not. So this movie's not really about sex. But also, I'm like, you want to be gross? I'm a person that I think David Cronenberg's Crash is like one of the best movies ever made. And that's a movie that's actually shocking and actually says really deep things about how people relate to each other sexually. This movie doesn't say anything. No.
There's someone on Letterboxd. I don't want to like steal their idea, but I just want to credit. It's not an original idea to me, but they basically said it's like, this is a movie about like it's like trying to be like provocative and sexy or something, but it's like almost like made by people who have never had sex. It's like or don't understand at least the complexity of human desire and all that kind of stuff. It's like and I almost wanted to say like I was prepared for it to be out there and like shocking and all these things, and it's like, but yeah, it like really pulls its punches at times. It never like it really goes anywhere that is actually like interesting, like something like Crash, where you're like maybe disturbed, but like you're like trying to understand the psychology and stuff because it's so obvious, right? It's like everything's telegraphed so badly, and then a part of me was like, if you're gonna be that blunt and like purient in some sense, it's like I was like, to paraphrase, Walter Sobchak, it's like at least pornographers have the like strength of their convictions. This movie is like it wants to have it both ways. It's essentially pornographic in a sense, but it like never gives you anything.
Yeah. No, that's I think that's the central thing where it's like, and maybe this is why I think this whole conception of this romance presented in this way, where the key difference, besides all the changes to adaptation, etc., we can get into adaptation just a little bit, but even taking any of that aside, this presentation of these two people who are pulled apart because of bad decision and their bitterness towards each other, or their perceptions of what the other person wanted, charts their life apart when they should have been together. But it's such a minor conflict that keeps them apart that is almost instantly resolved once Heathcliff comes back and is like, I'll just take you, and then they consummate it. And I'm like, this movie is playing for erotic titillation for a very specific audience, right? And, it's coming out at a time when Heated Rivalry is like the most popular TV show. And I haven't watched Heated Rivalry yet, but it does sound like Heated Rivalry at least has some like steam to it.
Yeah.
And it's because it's about taboos, right? It's two men, and it's in hockey, which is like a homophobic culture, etc. I can understand the transgressions and where the erotic impulse comes out of it. In this movie, coming out in a culture where Bridgerton's really popular and romantasy is the dominant lit fiction of the day, what is actually like, where's the tension between Heathcliff and Kathy in this movie? Because the actually most, I don't know, tensely romantic and actually like erotic stories are often ones where the characters are so dearly denied the thing they want and crave so much. And this movie denies the characters nothing. And so how, like, I was struck by this thought coming out of the movie that I think Twilight is a significantly more erotic movie than this movie.
How old are you?
17.
How long have you been 17?
A while.
Because you build tension through denial in Twilight. Aaron, I think that the film's tensions aren't because it withholds anything from the characters. And it isn't because it's grappling with taboo subject matter. Even, it's flirting with things that are becoming increasingly more mainstream. If it has aspects of BDSM, etc. So it's not really, even titillating or provocative in terms of like even what it's hinting at, not showing in terms of sexual content. But the central tension is that it's like, I'm taking a classic of English literature and I'm going to sex it up and add all this stuff. And that is like, that's the transgression. So the transgression is actually kind of the mishandling of a literary classic.
Let's defile a classic.
Yeah.
It's actually sexy for me to drag a book through the mud and the moors.
Which has an interesting, probably unconscious parallel to the way Heathcliff treats people, especially in the novel, where he's like, I'm angry or I want to cause you some feeling to you, so I'm going to mishandle you. And he does that with Isabella. He does that with others. And it's strange that the movie imitates kind of that darkness of Heathcliff, and just like, I'm just going to take something and kind of like mess it up and mar it. And like, how do you like that? That's my take on this, because I think I'm being a little bit generous in some of this stuff because I just don't like this movie.
Oh no, it's kind of terrible. I think we can transition to the adaptation thing, because I think the foundation of so much of it does come down to it's being a really poor adaptation, or at least its choices that it makes in adaptation rob it of so much richness.
Yeah. But this would just be another Bridgerton if it wasn't Wuthering Heights, right?
Exactly.
Like, you could just tell a similar story to this with the same content, and people would be, maybe sort of into it, but maybe not.
No, and it's been a hit. Like, it's made a good amount of money.
Well, people have said, it's maybe, having a film that is made, primarily for a female audience that is, just kind of slop the way that like a lot of like action movies and like stuff for men is. It's like, okay, fair enough. But like, the problem is this movie really thinks it's more of a like provocative in the sense of like a Cronenberg or even a Tarantino, whereas I'm like, it's so juvenile. It's more like a Boondock Saints.
It's not slop because it comes by its badness earnestly and honestly.
True.
Like, I think she's making deliberate artistic decisions that are all just the wrong decision.
I think that's
or overly simplified and reduced.
Yeah.
Like it takes out of the novel. It says that, okay, there is in their terms of their possessive love for each other, there's a sense of dominance, and I will sort of possess and control the other person. And then it just says, okay, let's understand that on simplistic erotic terms, make their relationship largely a sexual one. When in the book, obviously the time period when it was written, they can't get into any sexual details. But their interest in each other seems to far transcend simply sort of the erotic attraction. Like it is almost like some sort of possession of the other person's soul.
So I just finished reading the novel, And I actually think, Kathy and Heathcliff's love for each other is not particularly romantic in any of the conventional forms, which is why I actually disagree with this idea of this novel as a romance primarily.
I don't think it was written.
It's a gothic novel,
Yes.
That's the genre.
Well, it's a capital R romantic work.
Yeah,
and I actually think it's actually exploring,
but it's not a love story.
The dark side of romanticism.
Yes, I think that's the correct answer.
Individual feeling being pursued to its own ends. And that always is then related to the Gothic, too.
When I read the novel, the core...
Because this was your first time, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
The core thing that captures their romance is actually, I think, the best scene in the movie, because it's the scene in the movie that plays it the most straight, and it's where Kathy's talking to Nellie, and Heathcliff overhears that he would degrade me to marry Heathcliff. Mm-hmm. That moment. And it's because it's the scene in the movie that is the most similar to the scene, the actual novel, except for the added wrinkle of destroying Nellie being willfully cruel.
Right.
In the novel, she's not. She's more of trying to avoid making a scene. But the whole line in that sequence prior to it is, I'm just going to read this because this really sums up Kathy's obsession with Heathcliff. He's more myself than I am. Whatever our souls are made of, his and mine are the same. If all else perished and he remained, I would still continue to be. And if all else remained and we were annihilated, the universe would turn to a mighty stranger. He's always, always in my mind, but not as a pleasure to myself, but as my own being.
That is the core quote from the book, right? Like when I studied it in university, that's like...
Not as a pleasure to myself. Yeah. She does not pursue Heathcliff for the attainment of a denied pleasure. He is actually... She already possesses him. That's the whole point of the book, is that they are so much each other's entirety of the world that they can't allow room for anything else to exist and take any orbit or sunlight in their lives. So if the other person blots out the sun, they are content to put everybody else into dark. That's like the whole story.
But again, it's taking those emergent qualities associated with what we would call nowadays romantic love, which really start to develop in this time period, and it explores it to like its logical conclusion, saying that, you know, when we say to someone else that we're in love with, you know, you are my world, what does that actually mean for the rest of the world? Mm-hmm. And, you know, and Kathy and Heathcliff are the example of like, well, what if you actually followed that through? Other people are meaningless. They're pawns. They're basically animals or less that you can just use and misuse to get be with that person. Or
but it's almost like immaterial whether they would even be together in the book. That's the whole thing.
Because they already are from
childhood. It's just the concept of the other person existing is enough.
And this is why I think like this sort of bridges some of our two parts of our conversation so far, is why it's a bad adaptation. It's because, I think you alluded to it, like it strips away actually anything interesting and makes it simple, obvious, crude, in a way that the book is interesting, actually provocative, challenging some of the questions of its period. And I think, in an
time
adaptation,
period was a provocative work.
Yes,
such that Charlotte Brontë had to write a preface talking about, how do we, that's the sister of Emily Brontë, talking about how, how do we justify the creation of a literary figure like Heathcliff, who seems so horrible? So even at, the time of, understanding it within its context, this was a work that was provocative and charged.
So if you want to do a subversive or, some kind of academic deconstructive reading of a text and things like that, I think that's a legitimate thing to do, but this is certainly not it. This is, it is just I wouldn't even, and it's not even a distillation of it into like some sort of essence. It's just just stripping away and making it like pretty much like any other like, steamy romantasy.
And adding in silly scenes, bad humor.
We have to get into in a little bit the style in a general sense.
Which I think has some good qualities to it. But is uneven. She's
not untalented or has an eye for an image. It's whether those images mean what she thinks they do is the big question here. But just on this idea of adaptation, like I just feel like it so profoundly not only misunderstands the romance between the two, but it robs the characters of basically any interest. And that kind of goes to what you were saying, Anders, that it strips down. It's not like a distillation of the essence of a character. It's just a much simpler version of that character. And so, aside from Kathy, do we know the motivations of any character in this movie as presented? Because Heathcliff in the novel is truly one of the most monstrous like figures in English literature. He's evil, basically. Like he's love turned into just black bile, and that's it. Like he's just monstrous. There's literally a line that is burned in my brain from the book. Had I been born where laws are less strict and taste less dainty, I should treat myself to a slow vivisection of them too, as an evening's entertainment. And he says this completely seriously to Nellie about how he would like to see his son and Kathy's son ripped apart in front of him because he hates them so much. Like, this is what that person is. He's not the poor stable boy who's really hot, but it's too bad he's poor to marry.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, Heathcliff in this movie, he's abused a little bit in one key scene, which the whole movie puts all the weight on. It's
Yeah.
The
Kathy's
whipping.
father
When he takes
punishing
the
him.
blows for her.
Yes. But in the book, that's Heathcliff's abuse is like the abuse that he suffers is both more mundane, less intense than this, but it's more constant and petty and childish. And it's like he holds on to the way that children are cruel to each other, but he like holds that and in that form and has the same kind of vile, response to it that like a 10-year-old boy who's been aggrieved does. But the movie doesn't have any of those elements. So Heathcliff's whole project when he returns is so confusing. And it's just like he becomes this pure avatar of just lust for Kathy. He's not really a character.
But so when he returns in the movie, why would he be so cruel to everyone when he essentially gets what he actually wants?
Yeah, he's now a lord. It's fine.
Within the movie.
And the biggest thing is like I think there's something in, especially given maybe even some of the pretensions of this film and stuff. It really like is it rubs me the wrong way to treat Heathcliff in this way. Like in that it's like you've made him into this like hunky romantic like figure, and he's like, I'm like, I don't know, like.
It would be nice to be rich. What should you do, Heathcliff?
What?
If you were rich?
Suppose I'd do what all rich men do. I'd live in a big house and be cruel to my servants. Take a wife.
A wife? What wife?
Aye. I've always looked fondly on Rose from the Crown.
The landlord's daughter. She's quite the plainest girl I ever laid eyes on, and dull too. Shockingly dull. She's practically a simpleton. I cannot sit here all day talking nonsense with you. After all, the Lintons may call on me at any moment.
I will say that I think there's a long tradition of like people misunderstanding and thinking that Wuthering Heights is like this star-crossed lovers story between, Kathy and Heathcliff.
But like I can understand it's like this sort of like a fetishization of like this sort of monstrous figure. This is not that.
He's the
This is, like,
Byronic
again,
hero, but right, it's the idea of like people are viewing him as Byron as opposed to viewing him as the true like the shadow form of that character.
And the other thing is that in the book, I think one of the big themes in the book is that human cruelty is conditioned by people's circumstances and produced.
It's such a nurture, not nature book.
And, it's important that we have no idea what Heathcliff's actual origins are. I mean, that becomes a whole sort of interesting sort of racial aspect to the book.
He's darker.
Which
They
the
call
movie,
him a gypsy.
doesn't allow.
Gypsy
We can talk about
Lascar.
that
Like,
later.
yeah.
But then it's also the sense of, you don't know what sort of abuse. He was just this foundling that he picks up on the streets of Liverpool. And at the same time, then the entire rest of his life, apart from Catherine, everybody constantly, endlessly mistreats him. Like there's a handful of people like Nellie, the narrator, who actually sort of just treat him nicely or take him for what how he acts. And the strange thing is that then the movie, again, when we approach this as sort of like a modern moderns adapting something from the past, it's like it's interesting how then we lose all that nuance and that what's there in the original text, and it makes it, as movies sometimes do in adaptation, they try to have one or two scenes to make everything, but then it misunderstands that it's like, Heathcliff isn't forged from one or two instances.
It's about the constant petty abuse.
But this movie is very preoccupied with how instances imprint on people. There's the whole aspect of sort of, the sexual aspect of Catherine witnessing, right? Like the BDSM
This
sex
movie
and
is
how that
about
imprints
trauma
on her.
culture.
Yeah, no. But it sees trauma as a singular. It sees trauma as a singular event rather than a general sort of conditioning, and therefore is another example of how it reduces and simplifies things.
Yeah, it's like, Kathy even ending up in the top of the barn where Joseph and Zilla are, using the bridle stuff, like for the horses to hold her back. And, here's another example of, wow, you have just no respect for any of the characters in the novel. Joseph is not a likable character. He's a bit of a bastard. He's the surly, extremely speaks in like extreme Yorkshire slang. You kind of ununderstandable. He's cruel, but he's also extremely devout, and he's constantly talking at people in the novel about how he's disgusted by their like evil unchristian habits and stuff. And so it's like turning Joseph into this just like lusty barn hand who wants to screw the maid is just like, come on.
Fennell
did you read the book at all?
But from
Apparently
the opening, well, there is the whole question of I could watch this movie, and again, this isn't to judge Fennell, but I just say, with a lot of people with Wuthering Heights, it's like, did you read the whole book, or did you just watch the 1939 movie?
Yeah.
Because I do feel like this sort of simplified version is most people's impression of it.
Yeah, because it's like what you said. It's like, Fennell has said, though, when you ask whether she's read the book, she has said that basically
she still loves it, right?
She didn't really reread it. She read it when she was a kid. Okay. And this is it's pretty much based on her impressions of it. Right? I mean, very interesting.
But she described it as something she really liked it.
Important,
when she
yes.
did read it, right?
Yeah. And it's funny though, because I think it's interesting to what impression a piece of art makes on a person, when they're young versus when they're old, and that kind of stuff. But I can't help but contrast it with. Do you guys know the song "Wuthering Heights" by Kate Bush? It was one of her first hits from the late 70s when she was very young. Oh yeah. And it has the line about Kathy, Heathcliff, it's me, I'm at the window, and all this stuff. And it's funny because Kate Bush has said, I never read the book. She's like, I was actually flipping channels on the BBC and saw an old adaptation. And then there was just this haunting scene of Heathcliff and Kathy. And I just wrote this little song about it. And she's like, it's not meant to be a serious, it's just an impression from this film that I saw. When she first started recording, she was in her late teens and things like that. And it's so I think it can be interesting, but it's really interesting that that is way more tenuously connected to anything about the book other than a brief piece of imagery from a film, right? And yet I would argue that it stands on its own as a work of pop art, and this does.
But that's the whole thing. It's I think there's something admirable about the fact that she's I'm not interested in this being a proper adaptation. I'm going off of the emotions that it stirred in me as a 13-year-old. It's just that those emotions she has stirred in her are so simplistic and boring. It's frustrating as an adaptation because it's so much less than the novel.
Exactly.
It's not that it's different.
Yeah, I think I don't think an adaptation has to be always quote unquote faithful how people understand it. But I do think if we want to treat texts fairly, charitably, that when you're taking an adaptation, if you're going to do it and put it out there as an adaptation, and we all know that people will borrow from things and then you make it your own and you give it a different title and stuff. But if you're going to put something out there with sort of the impression that this is somehow a different version of this earlier story, I think part of your program should be to try to understand that text and not just do what you want to do. So I think you can do a drastic change. If that drastic changes in some sense, trying to make us see something different about that original thing,
right,
in a different way. And so I think, again, I often don't like them, but I think sometimes there is room for those sort of deconstructions, the subversive reading, because sometimes they can get at something that you hadn't really noticed before. And that's what
ideally a deconstruction does, right?
To call attention back to the original.
It shows something that's actually present in the text, but just draws it out rather than like implying a completely different framework to it.
But even in terms of not just adaptation, the program of this film, meaning like what's the artistic design and aims, seems to me very fragmented and scattershot and misguided. And one of the things that really rubs me the wrong way about this film is just the portrayal of the past. I think you can do a modernized, I think you can do anachronisms. But if you're going to do it, don't try to sort of set up the period as having like... Don't set up your judgments of the period at the same time. And I found like I hate the opening scene with the hanging, and it totally misunderstands the
Is that correct me? Like, so the opening scene, for anyone who for some reason is listening to this but hasn't seen the movie, is of a public hanging
that gets
town.
Everybody really horny.
Because, and also it's the
and Kathy's watching
and when a man is hung, it constricts the blood and he has an erection, and they see the erection through his pants, and it's like, ooh, and it's like, but like I have a honest historical question, Anton. You study something probably closer to. I haven't studied early 19th century England in a while, but like would it have been common, and especially in that class and like stuff like that, for kids to go see a hanging? Like, I know that there were public hangings quite late in society, but I don't know. It seems so fake to me. I don't know.
Well, so I think okay, like I'm not an expert in like public executions of the past, just to put this out there. But I would say that my reading of a public execution in the past, it would be a popular thing, but it's partly because it's like it's a novelty. It's something like someone's going to die. Something important is going to happen here. And people, even if they maybe don't like the idea that the person's going to die, and some people will, they would still go because they want to see it. Other people will go there because they want to see justice served, because they maybe were the people affected. Like, there's all sorts of motivations people had to go to a public hanging. And it wasn't just because everyone was vile and cruel and loved to see someone die. So it wasn't just because the same way we watch certain horror movies. Like, there's sort of this idea that, like, this filled so many roles, but also, like, so death was way more common back then. So, like, but I also think like, it's not common, like, people usually break their neck when they are hung. Like, the point of the hanging, yes, people have done horrible, like, drawing and quartering, but that was a rare thing. Like, that's not usually how public execution.
It seems to be some kind of accident, though, right? That the guy is asphyxiated. Yeah.
Yes. But then again, why start the movie with an
executioner screwed up
everyone
then, right?
excited? Like,
yeah. But also, it's like, I mean, there's this long history in like literature of like, Eros and Thanatos, death and eroticism and all that. But this is like the most like casual, like just sort of like, oh, I'm just going to gesture at it to give it gives it the like sort of like dusting of like theoretical, but it's not really exploring the idea.
The dusting of Freud.
Yeah.
It's, Anton, you made a comment that you were like, death was more common back then. And that's another thing where it's like, okay, you want to make death a central feature here so that their sexual bond is seen as some kind of rejection of the inevitability of death, which makes her death more tragic. So there's some kind of dramatic irony there and stuff. Like, I think that's what the attempt is. Mm-hmm. But what's one really crucial aspect that you just completely excise from this adaptation? Oh, I don't know. Maybe all the tuberculosis that all the characters are constantly dying with. Like, the novel, almost every character is on the verge of death at like every moment, except for Heathcliff, who's like, I never get sick. I'm great. Like he's like, I'm actually feeling very real.
Preternaturally disposed in so many ways. He's such a so he can be cruel.
Nellie's like, are you sick? He's like, no, I'm never sick. But like Edgar in this movie, Does he ever get tuberculosis and be on the verge of death? Nope, never happens. Her father is for some reason a weird portmanteau or whatever, he's Hindley as well.
Yeah.
He's conflating all these characters. Doesn't really like no Hindley there. Actually, you lose a lot. Not even just from having the Next Generation stuff, but just this idea of like, I'm going to steal the Lord's son and make him the servant. Like,
it doesn't really make sense that the person who showed charity in bringing Heathcliff back would also be the person who kind of tortures him and others. Like, it just, it's a strange reading of the character.
Mm-hmm.
And I know we often make these compound characters to simplify things, but it's a weird choice.
Sorry, I didn't mean Hindley. Hindley's the brother.
Yeah.
The brother's son.
Yes,
so, Hareton. So Hareton's the one who has the interesting inversions, but Hindley's the one who's the one reaping the cruelty upon Heathcliff by being like, you're not actually my brother. You're not actually the lord of this house. Like, you're not a master. You're just a servant. And
he becomes the drunkard.
He becomes the drunkard.
Is.
The father's like sick, and then Edgar's sick, and then she's sick. Like, what I mean is just there's so much death in the novel, and there's not that much death within this world in the movie.
Except for an extremely drawn-out, weirdly graphic death of Kathy, which, again...
Yeah, but
it turns it into such a bizarre, like, spectacle.
Well, it's because she's in the flesh room. There's the egg. So let's talk about the style.
Can we talk
the
about
visual tone?
The visual tone.
The anachronisms. The fact that she lives in... Wuthering Heights itself is essentially a house from Tim Burton's Charlie and the Chocolate Factory with the weird like sheen walls. Like, it's very baffling decisions in some of it. Like, I think the stuff at Thorncross Grange with the opulence, the crystal ballroom, the flesh bedroom. Again, it's
satirical.
It's satirical, and it's literalizing aspects of the characters and the environment, right? Making them one and the same. It's as much as the enormous sweets that are arrayed on the table and food. Like, it's using the physical to show a so-called lack of the moral of the characters.
Yeah, and to be fair, I remember when studying Wuthering Heights that, pathetic fallacy, in which it was something that is often, in high school or first university brought up in relation to this text particularly.
The connection between character and
the
natural
character,
environment.
the Yorkshire moors and these characters, right? Like that the echoes the turbulence and the, weather and everything like that.
There's no accident that Wuthering Heights, which is blasted by the wind, is this place that also has such emotional and familial turmoil. So just for people who might not understand.
Exactly. And I think that can lend itself to like a stylized or non-literal sort of stuff. But again, as you say, the film kind of wants to have it both ways. It wants to have the like gritty early 19th century stuff, but then we're going to do this like kind of Tim Burton stuff. I think you said, Anton, right? I mean, I totally got vibes of that. Like this is, like you said, like Aaron, I don't know if you were talking about Burton's Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is kind of the film that actually reminds me a little bit of in some ways in the way it over-literalizes some things and all that.
That's the one, like visually it reminded me of the shot. There's the first shot of Wuthering Heights where I literally just thought of like, oh, Johnny Depp lives in there.
Yeah. And the rocks are bizarre. The rocks are jutting out so extreme and bizarre over it. And I 100% agree, Anders, that it's like, that could be an approach. But then you shouldn't be showing the moors as this beautiful, naturalistic environment at the same time. I mean, for me, that's just, there's a discord in the aesthetic that I find...
It chooses when it wants to be, stylized, and it's totally inconsistent. Yeah,
it's totally inconsistent in a lot of elements in terms of its editing patterns and its like use of the camera. And frankly, I think it's kind of incompetently constructed from like a shot construction sense, even though there's some striking images in it. Perfect example is the scene where Edgar and Isabel are introduced, and Kathy goes up and she climbs up the wall, and then you see her. So it's a wide shot of her looking in, and then it goes to close-ups of the faces, and then it goes to like a quick wide of Kathy, and then instantly the rest of the scene is just these close-ups. And so you get like this no real visual sense of like, how far is she from the wall? How big is this yard? Like,
to be fair, I think that is a common thing in a lot of television.
No, it's super common. Yeah.
I think though that's because they are shooting for small screens. They're shooting for TikTok, for
it's the blown out
people watching on their phones
of the video short zoomed into someone's face.
No, it's true, and I'm a person who really likes close-ups. They're super powerful, obviously. Like,
well, yeah, we talked about that in Marty Supreme in our last podcast.
Mm-hmm.
But I think here it's like there's no sense. We can't. It's hard to discern a sense behind when a lot of the close-ups are used. And I also just wish that a lot of filmmakers, and not just Fennell, would just give us some medium shots to give a sense of the geography for scenes. And I
you
like
can go to the
I'm going
close-ups
back and I'm
after
going back and I'm like, my goodness, and people said that George Lucas couldn't shoot a scene. Like, you know what I mean? Like, just that sort of George Lucas obsession with sort of a medium shot and characters kind of moving around within the frame.
He shoots like in John
like,
Ford style. Yeah.
But you're just like, we need some of that in film today to just get some sense of where people are. Because otherwise we want this we want a beautifully composed wide shot, and then we just want a bunch of close-ups, and you never know where things
but that's my whole issue with that one scene is like you get one person's wide shot, you don't get the reverse, so you're not even following like the simple TV edit style. So it's just it's like you're missing parts, which the editing lacks, like the editing and the visual composition lack a like comprehensive rhythm. It's like I just don't understand what this movie's pace is. It doesn't have a steady emotional, stylistic, or tonal temper that just kind of keeps us understanding what to expect. And that's not to its credit. It's like, I know it's trying to surprise and shock you with deviations from the text or audacious, explicit content on the screen. Well, not so explicit, but, intense content on screen. Explicit. Despite that, it's like you settle into a certain rhythm of the whole montage sequence. So, yeah, we have to briefly say like the Charlie XCX music where it occasionally turns into music videos for some reason, where you get like a montage sequence and then it's just a song over top that's anachronistic. But the whole section, once it's like Kathy and Heathcliff consummate the romance and start having this like kinky affair, right, of him just constantly coming in the bedroom and like showing up in the carriage, and they just start getting it on everywhere, and it gets, it's supposed to be, oh my gosh, they're just so naughty. And it's so childish, and that's why I say it that way. But the editing like moves so quick and so like rapid pace through that whole sequence, and then like most of the movie you don't have like any montage at all. And then you have these scenes that are supposed to be mournful, and it's like extreme narrow focus on Elordi's face and the moors and the fog behind him, and you're supposed to be kind of lost in this emotional swirling smoke of romance. And then you get absurd scenes where like, oh, we found Kathy's dad dead on the ground. Cut to like 5,000 bottles piled up in giant things on the wall, and you're like, did you mean for it to look like it was like cartoon drawings of like the place where Gaston parties? Like, is that what you wanted it to
I know.
be?
I'm like,
apparently.
I've read Knausgaard Book 1, Death in the Family, where it's all about him gathering the bottles in his alcoholic father's house, and it's insane and disgusting how many bottles are around. But they wouldn't be arranged in this comically weird way of stacks in the corner that look like a farce. But okay, clearly we don't like this movie. No, none of us like the movie. Maybe my challenge to you guys in the last few minutes on it is there anything you did like about it? Was there anything in the performances that you liked? Was there any chemistry between the two leads that you thought worked? Any of the supporting, or even in terms of style? I mentioned in my piece that I think some of the visual motifs that Fennell latches onto work in terms of bringing a unity that I find lacking to the rest of the text. So I find her preoccupation with backs as being kind of an erotic part of the body interesting, because it's unusual in that sense. But then it also becomes visually the point where like, the violence and the sex come together. So it's like, I really like the transition in time from when they're kids to when they're adults, using that sort of visual jump where it's like it's a match cut of like we see the boy's back and he has just the sort of the fresh wounds on his back and he has a shirt on, and then we cut to Elordi's muscular back and it's bare but it has the scars. And to me, like, I'm seeing that Fennell can do some things.
I would say though the one of the problems is we want to talk about the casting, but
Do you find any of the cast works?
I like. Because maybe it's because of other movies. I like Robbie and I like Elordi actually, but I just don't think they're right for these characters. For one thing, I hate to say it, I mean Margot Robbie's gorgeous, but she's like 10 years too old to play this character.
And she should also.
And it's like, okay, I guess now again, equal opportunity that men can, play way too young and all that. And then Elordi, I'm like, he's actually, again, we can talk about some of the, not to be all like, he should have been cast as a person of color or things like that. But like, there's some very weird stuff going on with the casting in this movie. But,
let's just tackle it just head on for a moment. It's just, so the movie brings up the fact of like, we're going to cast sort of anachronistically a visual minorities in roles. So we're gonna have Linton is a South Asian, and we're gonna have Nellie be East Asian.
Yep.
And we're gonna deal with that without comment, so that in this world of this fantastical version of Wuthering Heights, no one will comment on it. It's just sort of normal, even though historically it wouldn't be normal. And I think you can do that in movies.
Yeah, Bridgerton
I've commented
does that, right?
before that
I've never watched
I know
it, but...
Bridgerton has like a thin reason of why they try and justify
it. Okay. Do they provide a reason? It's not just totally race blind? Okay.
Yes. They try to, I've been told. I haven't watched it. But I always thought Kenneth Branagh in his adaptations of Shakespeare was a great example of like, in these sort of not historical worlds, but like these worlds of Shakespeare, yes, we can have Denzel Washington in Much Ado About Nothing, and we're not making it be dealt with like it's Othello or something.
Right, or like having...
His Cinderella, it works that way too.
The Green Knight, I actually thought
Dev Patel.
was fine
Dev
too.
Patel.
Patel.
But that's, again, it's a dehistoricized kind of mythologized version.
Yeah.
Even though it's an Arthur story, but what I mean is like it's not trying to be a specific time and place. So the question is, you're approaching Wuthering Heights. Are you trying to do a specific time and place? Is this supposed to be the Moors in 1801 when the book starts, and then the late 18th century before? And if you're going to do that, by doing this sort of casting, it ruins the fact that thematically in the original novel, there's a huge aspect of Heathcliff being a racial other. It's not describing him as being necessarily black, but it's speculated that he's darker. He doesn't look like someone from around here, and that becomes part of the
Spanish. Is he Romani, whatever? Like, yeah,
and that becomes part of the characters. Like they attack him for that. They distrust him for that, and so you lose a whole potential.
But then it's so bizarre to like, if you're gonna do like to me, it's the idea, like you have this whole this part of the plot, which is that Heathcliff has been otherized and racially abused in some way, right?
The movie doesn't.
And then we're also gonna have Linton and Nellie be racial minorities, and it's like bizarre, really bizarre, because then it's like you can do the race blind thing, but in a book or a story that has this thematic in it, it's like imagine doing Othello, but you're like, we're just gonna not
it's
have
not as
him
strong
be,
as in Othello,
it's not as strong as that, but like you can play with it and like have like
I will say I'm surprised that someone in 2026 wasn't like, hey, I want to probe the racial aspect of Wuthering Heights.
I'm actually kind of surprised.
That would be ripe for
Andrea Arnold already did it in 2011 adaptation.
I haven't seen that one, but I've heard, right?
He's black, and they plays it up. He's Caribbean. He's like English Caribbean kind of like background.
But to me, again, it just seems like it wasn't really thought through. It was like, we just want to cast who we want. I don't want the strictures of it has to all be sort of white people. Fine, if that's what you're going to do. But then, what are you doing with Heathcliff? So now he's just an extremely like hunky, he's an Australian guy?
Yeah. But they're both Aussie.
I guess they both are. You're right. That's actually kind of funny.
Aussie's taken over from the Brits. The only true Brit we got left is Fiennes, Ray Fiennes, who did play Heathcliff in the past. No, but I think that's just another example of this movie's simplification of everything, really. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and at the end of the day, I know people are very divided on this movie because I think, for one, critics are often hesitant to, I don't know, like shit on women's entertainment, frankly.
Don't you think it's also that she's built up, like Fennell has sort of
She
built
won an
up.
Oscar.
Yes. Like, no one, I feel like a lot of critics don't want to come out and be like, this is a bad movie. You really just did a bad one here. Like,
No, exactly. But that's what I mean is that they were hesitant to be like, well, there's more female filmmakers than before, but I don't really want to make a name for myself crapping on these like female filmmakers who are trying to make bold artistic decisions. She is trying to make bold artists, and all three of her movies are bold movies, right?
Yeah. She clearly has a program of provocation. Like, that's one of her hallmarks.
Doesn't mean she's made good movies.
Have you guys seen, like, I haven't seen Promising Young Woman. I haven't seen Saltburn.
Oh man,
And I
If you
will
wanna get
probably
to
go
it
watch
is
both.
insanely I can't.
That's a
even
movie.
get started on
See,
that one.
Promising Young Woman is the movie that when, like, 20 minutes into this film, I was like, oh yeah, of course she misunderstands something so profound because she made a movie about female revenge on rapists in which the triumph comes by the woman essentially killing herself and allowing the cops to
So
do
distasteful.
justice, where it's like, wait a second, you really don't understand like what like you're trying to be really serious about this topic and you actually think the solution here is women should sacrifice themselves to trust in law enforcement? Is that
It's
actually how
insane.
you
It's
think this
insane.
should work?
But also just the way that it is so
But
distasteful.
you know what I mean? Like, she genuinely thinks it's saying something different.
Yeah. I would like to see Saltburn because I can't help but, well, I think of it as Bride
And Elordi's in that
Brideshead
one too.
Revisited, right? It's Brideshead Revisited, like, but
Yeah.
sort of an extremely loose adaptation, which is then interesting in terms of this, where you're like, you couldn't just sort of actually go with it being an extremely loose adaptation.
Yeah.
It's true.
You wanted one nice thing to say about the movie? It was like,
Yes.
I'll be honest, I
Because
did,
neither
I
of you
kind of
have
like,
given me that.
I kind of like the Charlie XCX music.
Yeah, I actually
it works, and I
it
thought
worked.
the couple of when I kind of like the like swelling in the music video parts.
Yeah.
That for me were the only parts of the movie where it slightly came alive, and I think it was mostly due to the music, as Aaron said, rather than like the editing. It doesn't really have like it's not like great music video editing or anything like that. It's just the music kind of lends its like pop, like vibes to it, and that's about it.
I'll say that I like the score element of it. I don't like her music, like the songs with the lyrics. I don't particularly like those that much, but the score is interesting. However much I think that he's miscast for Heathcliff, I actually do like Elordi in the film.
He's a good actor.
I think, but I also, in a movie like this, he's striking. Like, he's interesting to look
He's
at.
too cool though.
No, I know. But what I'm saying
When
is
he
that
Like when
comes
he
back,
comes
I
back and he's got
appreciate
his
like him
like
better.
suit and he's shaved and he's got his earring. I'm like, he's really cool. He's a
exactly.
handsome
But like,
guy.
I appreciate a movie that seems to be comfortable in kind of like just basking in its stars and their beauty, because that's not particularly common in movies nowadays. Movies like to kind of leer in a weird, goofy way at people, or they like to try to like they don't embrace the artificiality and like the movie magic of like you can just frame somebody and they look like gorgeous. And this
These
movie
two actors
does that. They're both beautiful actors.
could have been great. Like they have the look. They could have been classic movie stars, right? And so it's kind of, maybe that actually increases the disappointment, because I'm like, we need just a nice like classic pop movie to showcase like good looking movie stars.
And there's a lot of, it's the poster, which has the lighting.
Looks like a novel.
It
looks like Gone with the Wind.
Yeah, and like, that's sort of the promise of the kind of sort of transformative
Okay.
adaptation you could have done there.
I do also like the very deliberate Gone with the Wind reference when he rides off and it's like the red sunset. Like that's where you're like, it's a super clear visual reference, but it actually is very evocative in that way of being like, it's not realistic at all, but I'm actually swept up in this moment.
I have not broken your heart. You have broken it. And in breaking it, you've broken mine.
Well, I feel like we've said plenty on a movie that we didn't care for much. But I guess, again, that's the virtue of a interestingly bad movie as opposed to slop. I don't think this movie's slop. I think it's just like...
It's not forgettable.
It's just bad. in a more comprehensive way. Because there's no there with most slop. But we didn't want to let the podcast end before noting the passing of Robert Duvall, who was never really the leading man of New Hollywood, but perhaps one of the supporting men of New Hollywood. And was that up to the very end?
I think he was often described at the time, like in the 60s and especially the 70s, as the second lead.
That says it so well, actually. And Robert Duvall is not one of those actors I'd ever put on a short list in the same way that even like Robert Redford, who we talked about in recent months. And like, I think it's because, you know, a movie like The Godfather or a movie like Apocalypse Now, even if I would put those very high on my list of like best movies, he's not necessarily what I associate that movie with. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the case for many of his movies. I'm trying to think, and there's not that many movies where like he is the sole defining attribute of it, but I think that might be like part of why he was so interesting as an actor and so good, because he gave so much to rounding out the real, like the authenticity of the story worlds that he inhabited by being the kind of consummate second male star in it.
For me, like, because like I will always remember him most as Tom Hagen in The Godfather, and you know, obviously from Kilgore and Apocalypse Now, right? Working with Coppola, and those are smaller roles,
but they're really great. Line.
Yeah, I love the smell of napalm in the morning, right? And then of course I was reminded of like he's the original Frank Burns, right, from MASH too. A very different kind of take on the character in some ways. But I guess I haven't, here I'll be honest, I haven't seen his, I think, the couple films where I think people would say are his, like obviously I haven't seen his Oscar-winning turn in Tender Mercies, and I haven't seen The Apostle, unfortunately. I should check those out, you know, in memoriam here.
I would say that I think Duvall emerged into becoming more of a recognizable as Robert Duvall in movies as he got older. Yeah, where it became kind of like a pleasure to just be like, oh, it's Robert Duvall, and I'm a little bit grumpy, I'm a little bit like telling people stuff.
Like Open Range,
like my boys were watching, Open Range, the same year, the Secondhand Lions, and it's just old Robert Duvall doing stuff, and it's like fun. Yeah. I think there are some early works of his that often people forget, and they didn't pop into my mind until I was looking over his filmography again, and I was like, oh yes, was one of his very first roles on screen, Boo Radley.
That is his first role.
His first big screen role.
Okay, but like my goodness,
I think of him as
you
Boo
get to
Radley
show up
mostly,
as Boo Radley in, you know, To Kill a Mockingbird.
Great
You're like,
movie.
that's
Great
one of the great movies. So an iconic moment for him in that first role. And then I would also say an underrated performance, I think, because I think this is a legit great movie that nobody has seen anymore, is THX 113.
Yeah, I was going to say
and
THX.
He's the lead in it, and he actually has this really raw, like tender, new Hollywood performance in, you know, Lucas's strange, kind of icy science fiction movie, and he's really good in it. And it's not Duvall being the way we often kind of expect him to be.
One other great classic supporting one I forgot was he's also in Network, which is, you know, a good one that not enough people talk about these days. But you know, he's definitely and the Natural as well, which I always think of as well. Yeah. Speaking of Redford and Duvall, there you go. Now we've lost both of them.
Come back though and say that, like, I do think, you know, when you look, I think he was 95 when he passed. He's been in so many huge movies. You're like, you can't ask for more than that in a career. It's so rich and full. And then at the same time, I'd say, but at the same time, who else, like so few actors get to ever just kind of have one of those iconic lines that is forever repeated. So, you know, coming back to the Apocalypse Now part, you're just like, even if you just had that one role, you're like,
I don't know.
you'd be immortal. So It's kind of an amazing career.
Pretty
It's
great.
amazing when someone gets to have it.
And I think one of his last big roles, Aaron, was in Steve McQueen's Widows. Was one of his last.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, remember, one of the last 2 movies he made were both Netflix movies, but Hustle. He's in Hustle.
Oh, yeah.
Adam Sandler.
Totally forgot.
Dad is so fond of the movie. It's weird. It's one of those dad movies that struck a chord. He actually does love Secondhand Lions. He really liked that movie. But in I think it was 2011 when it actually came out, Get Low, this kind of indie drama where it's Bill Murray, Sissy Spacek are the other stars, and he's this kind of old man, and he decides that he's gonna like get low, which is finally tell the truth, and he kind of bears this public penance for the fact that he had an affair when he was like in love with a woman who was married to another man, and how he's like he basically lived his whole life with this like deep regret. And Dad, like, bring that movie up with Dad. He'll like very fondly start talking about certain lines in it and Bill Murray's weird appearance and live as like the quirky like lawyer and best friend and stuff. But it is funny how I would never say that's, you know, one of his great movies or one of his most notable performances. But when he passed, I really was like, he was so fixed as that kind of old man right on the edge, you know, looking back at like, what a life you had, but also like, man, what stories could you tell? And that's kind of him, because he's one of those new Hollywood guys that are like coming in right at the beginning of that transition, and he lived the whole thing, right?
That's the big thing to me thinking about Duvall is like, he's like in the last couple of years, we're just losing all those like new Hollywood guys, you know, and realizing that, you know, it's kind of the end of an era of certain kinds of actors. I don't know that there is like, you know, future generations will have their choices about who. And, you know, obviously Duvall's heyday was before my adulthood. But nonetheless, you know, it does feel like sort of like, you know, he had a good long life, great career, lived in, may that we all live as long as he did. Yeah, it's for the rest of us. It's like a little bit of like just a reminder that the clock is running out on like a lot of that classic Hollywood.
Smell that? You smell that? Napalm, son. Nothing else in the world smells like that. I love the smell of napalm in the morning. You know, one time we had a hail bomb. For 12 hours, when it was all over, I walked up. We didn't find one of them, not one stinking dink body. Smell, you know that gasoline smell? The whole hill. Smelled like victory.
Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode of Three Brothers Filmcast.
Goodbye, Mr. Bond.
I bid you farewell.